Wonderful. Thank you, Lauren. Let me just share my screen here and we will get started. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stan Mierzwa, and I want to talk to you a little bit today about physical security video solutions and evaluating the security of these systems, which hopefully provide security for us. I think I'll probably speak for 30 minutes or so, and then be happy to take any questions at the end. Maybe it'll take a few minutes longer, but that's typically what I think this will run. First, I want to give a thank you to Lauren Scott and the Centers of Academic Excellence in Cybersecurity, the whole program office, for giving me this opportunity to speak to you all today. I think there's been a really great collaboration from my viewpoint and just coordination effort to make this happen for me today. And I hope to be really, I'm grateful to contribute more to the community. And I think that's, one of the things that I certainly hope to continue to do going forward. So I'm speaking to you today from the Kean Center for Cybersecurity in Union, New Jersey. And we are an actual office. We're in a building. We're back on campus, taking it with all the precautions. But I encourage you, if you're ever in New Jersey and not too far from the major airport here in Newark, I encourage you to stop into our offices. We're in a building called Hines Hall, and we're on the 5th floor. And I welcome with open arms anyone who ever wants to come in to talk about cybersecurity or other topics of mutual interest. So I've got 9 main sections that I'll speak about today. It looks like a lot, but it won't take all that much time. Sort of like, I believe, 9 innings in a game, baseball game, an American baseball game, but it won't take certainly several hours. I'll tell you a little bit about myself so you know who it is speaking to you. We'll talk about a recent cloud vendor hacking incident that happened just several months ago, and some of you may have picked up on this in the news. It made quite a bit of a stir in the industry early on in the year, this is sort of a reminder about the incident, and not specific about the company that had the incident, but about video surveillance systems. We'll talk about cameras everywhere, right? We can't go too far from our desks without seeing video surveillance cameras. The IoT movement and growth, and how that's being fueled by the video surveillance industry as well. Models of camera termination, we'll get a little bit into that topic. And then I've got several slides on how to, from a really high standpoint, review your video surveillance systems. And then there'll be a small conclusion and then certainly time for questions and answers. So myself, I am the assistant director and a cybersecurity lecturer here at Kean University. I've got a vast IT experience, everything from software development to network management, which led into doing security and cybersecurity at a state agency in New York City. And I'm also a board member of a nonprofit organization, Venue Foundation. But I just want to mention some of the international work experience because it's really helped shape my view of technology, about implementation, development of technology, and to ensure that it could be used anywhere in the world. And I bring that up because I think I put a lot of emphasis on ensuring that whatever we use can work globally. So the recent cloud hacking, you may have heard about this, and this is from March. This was reported by Bloomberg. Let me just move my screen here a little bit. Okay, 1 second, there we go. A company, Vercado, was hacked. A cloud video surveillance company was hacked and exposed over 150,000 cameras that were made publicly available. And the hacker group really didn't, pursue financial gain. They may have certainly obtained that, but they really wanted to show prevalence of surveillance in this area. And some of the video footage that they presented, and this was from the Bloomberg report, they had cameras, live camera feeds of prisons, for example. And this was, as I say, the source was from Bloomberg. This is from a Tesla factory I don't know exactly which one, but they had live video footage available and exposing it from a cloud vendor video surveillance solution. This is from an empty classroom. And it really, this is, I think, really hits to me being, the fact that I'm working in an education institution. This certainly rung home to me. And when I see this, I think, oh my goodness, how did this happen? And is there something we could have done to try to prevent this? And what this helped do is provide a focus, right? A stopgap to say, okay, should we be looking at our cloud video surveillance solutions and determining what more we can do to ensure that we try to minimize those sorts of issues. So the hackers breach for CADA could have been any company. I'm not picking on them because we hear of certainly hacks all the time, and certainly they're probably not going to be the last one, correct? The hackers gained access to camera feeds. Upwards of 150,000 cameras reportedly were compromised. The feeds, as I said, Tesla, Cloudflare, a Florida hospital, a police station. And the alleged hack was as simple as having gained the account credentials for administrative level access, super admin access. They were found somewhere on perhaps the dark web, alleged reports. But in essence, this access was gained. And then because the cameras had a built-in maintenance login, it permitted super admin access of any camera of any customer. And so you may think oftentimes when we hear of breaches and hackings, they could be so sophisticated and really technical, but in this case, may not have been all that technical. And I'm going to explain that a little bit more. So what this had led was, oh goodness, I have a light in my office that goes out. It's one of these offices where if there isn't too much movement, the lights go out. It led to a small blog article, and that is what we're talking about here today, that I had written with a colleague of mine on this topic. And we said, you know what, maybe we should give a little bit of focus to all our cloud or any video surveillance solutions so that those in organizations that have these systems in place or even at home stop and say, maybe I should take a little bit of a view and a check of the system to ensure that we're doing the best we can to keep it private and secure. So cameras everywhere. Goodness, you can't go anywhere today. If I step outside my building within a 5-minute walk, I'll probably be within cameras, video surveillance cameras, maybe a dozen or so, quite honestly. They're ubiquitous. Stop at a traffic light, look up. I mean, there might be other things there as well, but if you're at a traffic light the next time, look up, you will see devices near traffic lights with perhaps video surveillance and other sensors as well in place. Goodness, this is buildings upon buildings. You may have them certainly inside your buildings, not just outside your building, and it's something that is used to manage security, physical security in organizations. At home, we have them. I know myself, I've got these cameras at home. I use them for certainly security of myself and my family, but also if I need to see what's going on. Let's say there was some issue and I'm not home and a neighbor called me and I wanted to at least check in, or perhaps there was a package delivered and I wanted to know whether I needed someone to go and obtain my package. You know, the fact of having a personal home video surveillance solution gives me comfort. But many times these could be connected to the cloud, and that's what we're talking a bit about today. So IoT movement, we all hear of the Internet of Things, and it's growing and it's got super momentum at this time. But what you may not realize is that the growth of IP-based video surveillance systems are considered one of the fastest increasing elements in this evolution. A report from Allied Market Research stated that the video surveillance industry annual growth between 2020 and 2027 is about 14.6%. And in terms of money or the financial aspect of it, we're talking about estimated $144.8 billion of an industry by 2027. So this is, you know, an area that's grown and continuing to grow. And I think this idea that when it comes to video surveillance and we have these systems in place, we need to stop and check them out every so often. So models of camera termination, there are many different ways and there's varying makes and models of cameras. And one thing I will state is, having worked on these personally myself, lots of different video surveillance management systems will permit multiple vendor cameras. And the terminations are basically the connections of these IoT devices into your backend system. So they may be housed to be on premise, for example, in a server room, a data center. They might be housed in infrastructure as a service in the cloud, for example. They may also be presented as appliances, as in the case of home systems. Go to your local Costco or BJ's warehouse. These are the warehouse club places where you could purchase very large supplies of, let's say, paper towels. They may also be selling home security systems as appliances, which is a package. And you could put these in place in your small businesses, your homes. There could be cloud-based shared systems, as in the Verkada example I mentioned earlier in the slides. There could be hosted paid providers. Think of those TV advertisements we see regarding security and video surveillance. With all this growth, this latest hacking, and just several months back, should be a wake-up call to review these our systems that we have in place. Even if they are being managed possibly by a third party, we need to assess our governance around these surveillance systems, just assess the security protocols to prevent such exploitation, if it is possible, right? And just give this topic a little bit more attention. So for some of you, you might be familiar, enterprise video surveillance systems are very similar to those such as an accounting enterprise system or an enterprise resource planning system. They could have multiple servers and backend systems, lots of different endpoints as well. And they come from different companies. This is just a handful that I'm familiar with, but I put it up there for some of you so that if you are in organizations that have video surveillance systems, you may recognize some of the names and say, oh goodness, we have a Genetec or an Avigilon or a Pelco system or OnSeat or Cognify, which you see in the bottom left, which is all part of these enterprise, often referred to as PSIMs, physical security information management systems. And they may include more than just your video surveillance. They may include card access systems, such as my card I have here, which allows me inside and into buildings. My light just went out again. I'm just going to wave my arm. Pardon me. Okay. So there are many of these popular enterprise video surveillance systems, and I just want to mention to you that they may act and present themselves just like any other client server application or otherwise, but they may take up infrastructure. There's also cloud-based systems, and there's a movement towards what is now referred to as VSaaS, video surveillance as a service. Yes, as a service. And we know there's lots of products as a service, and Verkada is one of them. Nest, who I'm personally familiar with as well. Lots of times they're used in homes. Rhombus, Arlo, Eagle Eye. These are an example of some of these cloud-based video surveillance systems. So what could we do? What are some of the strategies or areas where we can review our video surveillance system? Because there's lots of different ways to approach it. And we broke it into 5 areas. And we'll start with area review 1, which is the endpoint camera device. And it's important here because it may be possible that, as I said earlier, you may have multiple vendors and there might be multiple ways to access these cameras. But just like other devices, such as our laptops and our computers, there could be firmware on these devices that need to be updated in order to maintain their security. There could be software updates in the firmware. And obviously, if there are different vendors, there would be possibly different firmware. Very important, many of these IP-based video surveillance cameras may permit direct login. And what does that mean? direct login could suggest if it's got an IP address, which if it's IP based, it probably does have an IP address as an endpoint, but it might have the ability to log in with an IP address. So you want to ensure that it's secure. If it is set up with default passwords, that they're changed, just like you would do with your routers, for example. If multi-factor authentication is possible, you'd want to enable that as well. And these are things and items and qualities you may look at when it comes to just the cameras themselves. So when you look at these cameras now, you might think, oh my goodness, there's a lot more that they do or available to configuring them. You may consider setting up alerts around login activity, just the same as you do with your email account. For example, I set up my email account such that if it's logged into from a device that it's not familiar with or hasn't been logged before, I get an alert of some sort. You'll want to set up encrypted connections, HTTPS camera connectivity, if it's available. Hopefully it is. And you want to review your encryption settings to attempt to prohibit traffic sniffing, okay? So these little camera devices may have lots of features that could be considered very valuable in preventing incidents of hacking or breaches. Another area is the network itself, the communication network. So we hear this quite often around the use of network segmentation. And for enterprise designs, I would suggest that at a minimum, you segment the network for these very important systems, these video surveillance systems. There's the potential to integrate with internal firewalls. I think that's quite important as well. And if I jump to the last bullet on this, ensure that only the ports, okay, the TCP ports that are required are open to the endpoint surveillance cameras and of course the server administrative applications. So you'll want to minimize just as you do with other applications. In addition, you'll want to do some sort of analysis to minimize any sort of hemorrhaging of the flow of communication on this network where these cameras sit so that it does not go into any other segment. And that might require a little bit more technical discipline in really reviewing the traffic, but it is something that could be, I would suggest be at least approached. You'll want to assess the physical connection to the cameras in an effort to prevent man-in-the-middle attacks, MITM. Again, if these are in public spaces, perhaps there's cables dangling, for example. So looking at the physical connectivity of where these devices sit could be approached. Number 3 area is the backend system, what often is referred to as the security manager server or system. Again, it could be on-premise, hybrid, or in the cloud. You'll want to ensure that the operating system is patched, just the same as any other computer-related application you have running. Ensure that the software is on the latest version. I can't tell you how many times I've been in organizations where the video surveillance or perhaps the card access system is working, it's in place, and it hasn't been updated in years. Just the same as other applications, there are opportunities and there are updates to these systems. And I think that's something to consider if you want to put your best foot forward in trying to prevent a breach. You'll want to limit administrative access to the system. My lights just went out. I hope you can still see me, but I'm not going to wave my arm again. You'll want to limit admin access to these backend systems through multi-factor authentication, certainly privilege access management for a login defense layer. Keep that in mind, and these systems probably will support that. Consider the paradigm of zero trust, defining boundaries, really limiting and restricting the access to this backend system and the cameras themselves. Again, with the logging and alerting, these systems could be set up such that you do get alerts, perhaps, or you can at least ask the question if you can get alerts to any sort of anomaly events, just to provide, as I say, a heads up for security analysts to respond to potential breaches. So if you do witness a login from an odd location or any, just as you would approach any other server, these video surveillance systems could be also subject to attempts to log in by unintentional characters, or not, perhaps intentional, but not expected. You want to remind staff of the ethical responsibilities of having access to video recordings, right? Think chain of custody. Again, these should not be taken lightly. This is possible evidence that could be used, video surveillance. And I think those who manage these systems, work with the systems, use them every day, remind of, just a simple reminder of how important it is, these systems, for when it is really required. Areas review area number 4, if it is platform as a service or video surveillance. If it's in the cloud, you want to stay on top of vulnerability announcements. For example, in the case of any sort of cloud solution, they may have announcements, and you want to certainly be aware if there are configuration changes. Think of the Ring doorbell. If you recall, several years back, where there was certainly hacks against the Ring doorbell, they had certainly made some changes to ensure that there was perhaps a dual or multi-factor authentication to prevent the type of login directly into cameras, simply using accounts that were found on, on the dark web, reused accounts, right? We hear this often, the same username and password being used on your email and in this case, your video surveillance system and your LinkedIn account and your Facebook could create certainly vulnerabilities. You want to query the provider on their strategy for notifying if there are breaches. So in the case that I mentioned earlier, the example of the cloud security solution, there's no harm in asking the provider to tell you their strategy for how you would be notified about a breach. Certainly important to review the admin access password practices. In the case of the example today from Verkada, and it could be any company, I'm not picking on them again, this could be an opportunity to ask them to tell you their practices and policies around how they share their administrative access password with their staff, employees, or others. You want to find out who has access to stored or recorded video if it's in the cloud. Very important as well. As we talked about, the breach today was live video, but what about the stored and recorded video? Asking who has access, and again, querying the provider on that. You want to think about perhaps, and the Cloud Security Alliance has this bank of tools called the Cloud Control Matrix. Could be others as well out there. We certainly know about NIST frameworks and others, but evaluating the cloud vendor with a framework if you are approaching purchasing or signing with a cloud video surveillance system, just as you would with a cloud email system or cloud sales application. The final area is around third-party vendor access. And there is always the possibility that your physical security equipment that provides security for your organizations, your schools, your whatever organization is, a hospital, for example, it might be outsourced. And quite honestly, if you ever drive on the highway, I see security company vans all the time. It's a popular outsourced area of business. You'll certainly want to think about, follow the trail of access, as I like to say here. Review all access levels and determine whether any sort of deprovisioning is in order. And that's because with these third-party vendors, could be turnover, and understanding how those accounts are managed and whether they are deprovisioned is very important to just limit the potential of a breach. And you want to bring in, as I say here, your enterprise risk management practices if you have those in your organizations, if you're large enough, perhaps, for routine checks of your video surveillance solution. I'm going to move my arm just to get the light back on here. Okay. Have to do something about that. Okay, so where are we? In conclusion, so software and hardware solutions are created and certainly for physical security, they're created by humans and vulnerabilities will emerge. This was an opportunity today to take a small amount of time and say, okay, maybe we should, ask a few more questions about our video surveillance solutions that we have in place and understand whether it needs to be formally assessed or put it under your assessment strategy. The industry is growing and rapidly expanding. And as your organizations might be adding more and more of these IoT devices, this could be a perfect opportunity to look at how they're being implemented and ensure that they're being implemented securely and not just to get them working so that we can minimize breaches as we've seen in the beginning of this presentation. When provisioning or installing, you want to certainly keep security front and center. And if it's not already established, and this really is probably a 30,000 foot view, when you look at your organizations around how you are dealing with physical security, whether they are merged with your information technology security teams. That could be certainly an option or an opportunity to consider how those two teams might work together. They may work together already, but maybe there's an opportunity there to merge those two teams or get them at least collaborating a bit more. So where are we? So limitations of this research, this was a high-level introduction and awareness to certainly video surveillance. We covered a cursory set of factors. There could be many, many unique factors for your environment, but this might get the ball rolling for you to consider adding some sort of assessment strategy around your surveillance solutions. And just some do's and don'ts, and then I'll be able to certainly field any questions. So consider setting up multi-factor authentication, yes, and logging of your devices. Certainly review open ports used with your systems. Consider enforcing privilege access. I think that's important. Review your cloud vendor policies for access. Deprovision third-party accounts not in use. That's very important as well, because we don't need anyone getting access that shouldn't have access to it. So some of the don'ts: don't do nothing. We know this industry is growing rapidly. We know IoT is expanding. We know surveillance is expanding. This issue will not go away. I think we need to certainly put our best foot forward. Don't put your complete trust in a cloud vendor. Don't avoid assessing or querying the vendor. Ask questions of your cloud vendor or any of your surveillance solutions. Don't go at it alone. You don't have to, right? As we're doing here today as part of the CAE community, we can rely on each other and ask questions and see how others are doing it in other organizations. This might be that opportunity for you today. And consider management oversight of such solutions in your technology teams. And we have references to the materials, and I've referenced it along through the slides. And I think that's all I have. I want to say thank you for this opportunity from the CAE community, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, Stan. I really appreciate that. That was fascinating. It's fascinating how technology is these days. So thank you so much for presenting that. If you have any questions, please feel free to post your questions in the chat. There was one question from Yair. He said, let's see. Let me make sure I go back to this. Okay. He wants you to kind of go into the issues of NDAA versus non-DAA compliance systems, not to be political, but we have almost all of these non-NDAA platforms still, quote unquote, calling back home. And Yair, please feel free to unmute yourself if you had,
Sure.
if you want to clarify your question.
Sure, Stan, it's a pleasure to see you again. We just met yesterday on the.
Yeah, good to see you, Yair.
So the question is, so I'm teaching the issue of surveillance and cyber physical is very, very important here. The issue you're hitting is very dead on. But when I do talk about it, I mentioned the NDAA compliant versus non-NDAA compliant systems, specifically all those camera systems that have what we would call nation states, embedded security issues, if you will. I was a bit surprised you didn't mention that, but I do mention this in my class. So I was wondering, what's your take on that?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. There could be certain systems that have much more enhanced security. I think the systems that we were looking at here, and what really was the impetus, was this simple cloud solution that was breached earlier in the year. And a lot of times we'll put our trust in these solutions and think, okay, they're secure. We're told that they're secure, and that your solution, your surveillance solution, is not something you need to be concerned about. Right. But it wasn't the case in this in this scenario. When it comes to the NDEA, I'm not that versed in that area, so I'm not going to try to pretend I am. But if you're talking about disclosure agreements, I certainly think that there's, these are serious systems that we need to take very critically serious when it comes to evidence-based, when you need to have evidence for certain situations. I think that's when it comes in handy. I'll use a simple example. I have a video surveillance solution at my home, and twice in the past 2 years, I've had local police come to my house and say to me, Stan, we had an incident up the block, and we're only asking you if you don't mind, would you look at your history for these days between this time and this time? And if you find anything that's strange, would you please let us know? And it's a detective, for example. And it's happened already a couple of times, like I said. So I think this idea that, we may be called upon as individuals here with our solutions to provide, in this case, I was told, if you wish to provide it. Now, obviously, they can force me to provide it if I did have something available. But I think, each organization will probably have their own requirements, Yair.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, Stan, there were a couple more questions. So the next question is from Dave Pregel. Can you address the steps necessary to record audio as part of video surveillance? What notification is necessary to avoid violating wiretapping laws?
Yeah, I'm not going to touch the legal question. I'm not sure about wiretapping, but some of these cameras, certainly that I've seen, do have the ability to record some video as well. I think that's going to depend on your solution that you have in place. And I think that's something you would ask of your vendors. The wiretapping, I'm not sure if there's a legal expert on the line that may want to attach that.
Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to chime in.
Yeah, we're a community here.
That's right. So the next question is from Alan Wong. I feel the computing power swings towards the edge now. The IoT capability is likely to increase. Do you envision it will improve the situation, giving the improved security on the device end?
Yeah, well, I think doing nothing will keep it vulnerable. We certainly want to ensure that we're putting, if there is security that could be put in place on devices at the endpoint, because we know that's quite honestly, it could be low-hanging fruit for breaches and hackers. If there is that ability and you have it available, you should certainly use those qualities in your endpoints. In this case, if these were video surveillance. If you don't have that, then you may want to consider looking at, and obviously there's budget implications, but you may want to look at replacing those sorts of devices if that's required. So I think that's an important topic. It's just like any of our aged systems in our organizations. That is something that does routinely come up around whether they could be updated and patched or configured such that they're more secure.
Interesting. Next question. Do these surveillance systems generally support MFA?
It depends on, I have seen them used, so they can. Certainly there could be multiple areas, but one end is the backend system, which could be your server, which is running the main intelligence of the application. But on the endpoints as well, they can have that. I know on my own, my Nest camera, my simple little Nest camera, I could set up multi-factor authentication.
All right. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to post your questions in the chat or unmute yourself. All right. Well, Stan, I don't think there's any additional questions. Again, thank you so much. That was fascinating. And we appreciate you participating.
Thank you, Lauren, and I appreciate the opportunity, and I hope going forward to continue to be part of the community.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks.
Thank you so much. All right.